Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on business digital transformation. Stay with us now to learn how agile companies are fending off disruption in favor of innovation. Our next case study explores how, in an era when cybersecurity attacks are on the rise and enterprises and governments are increasingly vulnerable, that new capabilities are being brought to bear to the edge to provide better data loss prevention. We'll learn how Digital Guardian in Waltham, Massachusetts, analyzes both structured and unstructured data to predict and prevent loss of data and intellectual property with increased accuracy. Here to describe how data recognition technology supports network and endpoint forensic insights for enhanced security and control, we're joined by Marcus Brown, Vice President of Corporate Business Development for Digital Guardian. Welcome, Marcus.
Hi, Dana. Great to be here.
We're delighted to have you. Marcus, set the stage for us. What are some of the major trends that are going on that are making data loss prevention even more important, even more effective?
Well, data loss prevention, or data protection, as we say in general, is very much come to the forefront in the last couple of years. Unfortunately, we wake up every morning and read in the newspapers and on television and the radio, we hear a lot about data breaches. And it's really pretty much every type of company, every type of organization, government organization, et cetera, that's being hit by this phenomenon at the moment. So awareness is very high. What's been changing, apart from the frequency, there's a couple of key points. First of all, you have a lot of very skilled adversaries, coming into this. Criminals, nation-state actors, hacktivists, many others. All these people are well-trained and very well-resourced to come after your data. So that means, companies have a pretty big challenge in front of them. That the threat has never been bigger. In terms of, data protection, there's a couple of key trends, let's say at the cybersecurity level. People have been aware of the so-called insider threat for a long time. This could be, a disgruntled employee, could be someone who's been recruited, for monetary gain to help some organization get to your data. That's a difficult one because, the insider has all the privilege and the visibility and knows where the data is. So that's not a good thing. Then you've got, employees, well-meaning employees who just make mistakes. It happens to all of us. We suddenly type something in Outlook and, you've got a different email address than the one you were intending and it goes out to Gmail or whatever. So, you've got well-meaning employees as well. All of that is really the insider threat. What's really escalated over the last couple of years are the advanced external attackers, or the outside threat, as we call it, where you've got, these well-resourced, well-trained people from nation states or criminal organizations trying to break in from the outside, and they do that, with malware. A lot of people, phishing campaigns, 70% of the attacks start with a phishing campaign where someone clicks on something that looked, normal. That's one thing. And then just general hacking. There's a lot of people getting in really without malware at all. They just hack straight in using different techniques that, don't rely on malware. And people have become so good at developing malware and targeting malware at particular organizations and particular types of data. Tools like antivirus and intrusion prevention, a lot of these things just don't work very well. The success rate is very low. So, there are new technologies that are better at detecting stuff at the perimeter, but, and on the endpoint, but it's a tough time. So internal and external attackers, a lot of people outside. What they're after ultimately are the two main types of data that companies have. One is their customer data, which is, credit card numbers, healthcare information, all of this good stuff. All of this can be sold on the black market, per record for so and so many dollars. It's a $1 billion business. People are very motivated to do this. So, most companies don't want to lose their customers' data. That's seen as a pretty bad thing, bad breach of trust. So people don't like that. And then obviously for any company that has a product where you have intellectual property, you've spent lots of money developing that, whether it's the new model of a car or it's some, piece of electronics or whatever. It could be a movie, it could be some new clothing or whatever. It's something that's you've developed and it's secret intellectual property. You don't want it to get out. Plus all of your other internal information, whether it's your financials or, your plans or your pricing, all of that. That's intellectual property. So both of those things, there's a lot of people after that, and that's really the challenge. And in general, the world has become more mobile and spread out. There is no more perimeter to kind of stop people getting in. Everyone's everywhere and working, and living, and private life and work life is mixed, and you can access anything from anywhere. So it's a pretty big challenge. It's a pretty big challenge.
And it seems, even though there are so many different types of threat, internal, external, and so forth, one of the common things that we can do nowadays is get data to learn more about what we have as part of our inventory of important assets, but perhaps even more importantly, what happens to it. And while we might not be able to seal that perimeter off, maybe we can limit the damage that takes place. And so the earliest that an organization can detect that something is going on that shouldn't be, the quicker they can come to the rescue. So let's look at the idea of data about information and how the instant analysis of that data plays a role in limiting any negative outcomes.
Right. Well, if you want to protect something, you got to know it's sensitive and that you want to protect it, right? So you can't protect everything. You got to find which data is sensitive, and we're able to actually do that on the fly to recognize sensitive data and non-sensitive data. And that's a key part of the data loss prevention puzzle, the data protection puzzle. And we work for some pretty large organizations, some of the largest companies and government organizations in the world, as well as a lot of medium and smaller size customers. And whatever it is, we're trying to protect that personal information or indeed the intellectual property. We need to be in the right place to see what people are doing with that data. So our solution consists of two main types of agents, if you like. One, agents on endpoint computers, which could be desktops or servers, Windows, Linux, and Macintosh. So we have these agents. It's a good place to be on the endpoint computer because that's where people, particularly the insider, comes into play and starts doing something with data. That's where people work. That's how they come into the network, and it's how they handle a business process. So the challenge in data loss prevention is really to support the business process, let people do with data what they need to do, but don't let that data get out. So the way to do that is to be in the right place. I already mentioned the endpoint agent. We also have network agents, sensors, appliances in the network that can look at data moving around. But at the key place on the endpoint is the endpoint is really in the middle of the business process. So someone's working, they're working with different applications and they're taking data out of those applications and they're doing whatever they need to do in their daily work. And that's where we sit right in the middle of that. And we can see, who the user is and what application they're working with. I always give the example of an engineer working with the CAD or the PLM system, developing some new automobile or whatever, right? And that's a great place to be. Now, what we use, we rely very heavily on the HPE idle technology for helping us classify data, and we use it particularly for the structured data. So anything that's like a credit card number, alphanumeric data, could be also free text about healthcare, patient information, and all this sort of stuff. So we basically use idle to help us scan documents. We can recognize, regular expressions. That's a credit card number type of thing, Social Security. We can also recognize terminology. We rely on the fact that, idle supports hundreds of languages and, many, many different subject areas. So we're able to recognize a whole lot of anything that's, written textual language we use for idle. Our endpoint agent also has some of its own intelligence built in that we put on top of that, which we call contextual recognition or contextual classification. And like I said, we see we see the customer list coming out of Salesforce.com, or we see the jet fighter design coming out of the PLM system. We then tag that as well. So we're using IDLE, we're using some of our technology, we're using our vantage point on the endpoint, being in the business process, to figure out what the data is. And we call that data in use monitoring, pretty much. And basically, once we see something is sensitive, we put a tag on it, and that tag travels with the data no matter where it goes. An interesting thing is if you've got someone making a mistake, an unintentional, good-willed employee accidentally attaching the wrong doc to something and it goes out, obviously we'll warn the user of that. If you've got someone who's very, very malicious and is trying to obfuscate what they're doing, we can see that as well. So, just example, taking a screenshot of some top secret diagram, embedding that in a PowerPoint, and then encrypting the PowerPoint. We're tagging those docs. Anything that results from intellectual property or top secret information, we keep tagging that. And when the guy then goes to put it on the thumb drive or put it on Dropbox or whatever, we see that and stop that. So it's all part of the problem. But the 2 points are classify it. That's what we use. We rely on IDLE a lot for, and then stop it going out. That's what our agent is responsible for.
And let's talk a little bit about the results here when behaviors and people and organization are brought to bear together with technology, because it's people, process, and technology. The fact that you're able to do this, when it becomes known in the organization that you can do this, I should think that must be a fairly important step. So how do we measure effectiveness when you start using technology like Digital Guardian? Where does that become explained and known in the organization, and what impact does that have?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, our whole approach is a risk-based approach, and it's based on visibility. So you've got to be able to see the problem, and then you can take steps, exercise control to stop the problem. So when you deploy our solution, you immediately gain a lot of visibility. I mentioned the endpoints, I mentioned the network. And basically you get a snapshot without deploying any rules or configuring in any complex way. You just turn this on and you suddenly get this rich visibility, which is, manifested in reports and trends and all this stuff. And basically what you get, after a very short period of time is a set of reports that tell you what your risks are. And, some of those risks may be, your HR information is being put on Dropbox. You have, engineers putting the source code onto thumb drives. Could all be well-meaning. They want to work on it at home or whatever, or it could be really, some bad guy. A typical thing you see, one of the biggest points of risk in any company is when an employee resigns and decides to move on. A lot of our customers, use the monitoring and the reporting we have at that time to actually sit down with the employee and say, well, we noticed you downloaded 2,000 files and put them on a thumb drive. We'd like you to sign this, that you're going to give us that data back. So that's a typical use case, and that's all the visibility you get. So you turn it on, and you suddenly see all these risks. Hopefully not too many, but a certain number of risks. And then you decide, okay, what am I going to do about it? Well, in some areas, you might want to be very draconian and say, I'm not going to allow this. I'm going to completely block this. There is no reason why you put the jet fighter design up on Dropbox.
That's where the epoxy and the USB drives comes in.
Pretty much, yeah. On the other hand, you don't want to stop people using USB because it's about their productivity, et cetera, right? So you might want to warn people, you're putting some financial data onto a thumb drive. We're going to encrypt that so nothing can happen to it. But do you really want to do this? Is this appropriate? And, people get a feeling that they're being monitored and that, it's maybe not according to company policy the way they're acting. So they'll back out of it. So basically what I'm saying in a nutshell is you look at the status quo, you put some controls in place, and after those controls are in place, within the space of a week, you suddenly see the risk posture changing, getting better, and the incidence of these dangerous actions dropping dramatically. So you can measure, the kind of security return on investment in terms of people's behavior and what's happening very quickly. And, our customers use that a lot internally to justify what they're doing. Generally what you do, you can get rid of, a very large amount of the risk, say 90%, with, an initial pass or initial first two passes of rules to say, we don't want this, we don't want this. And then you're monitoring the status, and, suddenly new things will happen. People discover new ways of doing things, and then, you've got to put some controls in place. But you're pretty quickly up into the 90%, and then you're fine-tuning down, to get those last little bits of risk out.
Now, because organizations are becoming increasingly data-driven, they're, of course, getting information and insight across their systems, their applications, and now you're providing them with another data set that they could use. Is there some way that organizations are beginning to assimilate and analyze multiple data sets, including what Digital Guardian's agents are providing them, in order to have even better analytics on what's going on or how to prevent unpleasant activities? Yeah.
Well, that's another good question. So, in the security world, you have the Security Operations Center, which is kind of the nerve center of where everything to do with security comes to play. And, the main piece of technology in that area is the SIM technology. The market leader is HP's ArcSight. And, that's really where all of the many, many tools that security organizations use come together in one console where all of that information can be looked at in a central place and also be correlated together. So we actually provide a lot of really interesting information for the SIM, for the SOC. I already mentioned we're on the endpoint and the network. Particularly on the endpoint, that's a bit of a blind spot for a lot of security organizations. They're traditionally looking at, firewalls and other network devices and this kind of stuff. We provide rich information about the user, about the data, what's going on with the data, and what's going on with the system on the endpoint. That's key for, detecting malware, et cetera. So we have all this rich visibility, on the endpoint and also from the network. We actually pre-correlate that together. We have our own correlation rules. Actually, on the endpoint computer in real time, we're correlating stuff together. All of that gets populated up into ArcSight. And we'll be at the HPE Protect Show in National Harbor in a couple of weeks, 13th of September. And we'll be, showing the latest generation of our integration there, which we're very excited about. We have a lot of ArcSight content, which helps people in the SOC leverage our data. And we've got a couple of presentations there at the show as well to talk more about that.
And is there a way to make this even more protected? I believe encryption can be brought to bear, and it plays a role in how the SIM can react and behave.
So we actually have a new partnership. I believe this will be going out just when we announce it, September 14th at the Protect Show. What we're doing, HP has its acquisition of Voltage, which is, a real leader in the email security space. And it's all about applying encryption to messages and managing the keys and making that user experience very seamless and easy to use. What we're adding to that is we're actually bundling up some of the classification functionality that we have in our network sensors. And what we've got is a combination between Digital Guardian Network DLP and the HPE data security encryption solution, where basically an enterprise can define a whole bunch of rules based on templates we have to say, I need to comply with HIPAA, I need to comply with PCI or whatever standard it is. And what's going to happen is Digital Guardian on the network will automatically scan all the email going out and classify, according to our rules, automatically which emails are sensitive, which attachments are sensitive. It then goes on to the HP data security solution where it gets encrypted automatically and then sent out. So it's basically allowing corporations to apply standard set of policies, not relying on the user to say, I need to encrypt this, not leaving it to the user's judgment, but actually applying standard policies across the enterprise for all email, making sure they get encrypted. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, no, that sounds very key, using encryption to the best of its potential, being smart about it, not just across the waterfront, and then not depending on a voluntary encryption, but doing it based on need and intelligence.
Exactly.
Okay, one last question. For those organizations that are increasingly trying to be data-driven, intelligent, taking advantage of the technologies and garnering analysis in new, interesting ways, what advice might you offer in the realm of security? Clearly, we've heard at various conferences and other places that security is, in a sense, the killer application of big data analytics. If you're an organization seeking to be more data-driven, how can you best use that to improve your security posture?
Right. Well, I mean, the key, as far as we're concerned, is you've got to watch your data, you've got to understand your data, and you need to collect information, and you need visibility of your data. The other key point is, the security market has been shifting pretty dramatically from more of a network view, much more towards the endpoint. I mentioned that earlier, antivirus and some of these standard technology on the endpoint, not really cutting it anymore. So it's very important that you get visibility, down at the endpoint, and you need to see what users are doing. You need to understand what your systems are running, and you need to understand where your data is. So collect that, get that visibility, and then leverage that visibility with analytics and tools so that you can profit from an automated kind of intelligence.
Very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how cybersecurity attacks are on the rise, but new capabilities are being brought to the edge to provide for better data loss prevention. And we've learned how Digital Guardian uses HPE's IDOL to analyze structured data and predict and prevent loss of information and intellectual property with increased accuracy. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Marcus Brown, Vice President of Corporate Business Development for Digital Guardian in Waltham, Massachusetts. Well, thank you so much, Marcus.
Thank you.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer Digital Transformation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of HPE-sponsored interviews. Thanks again for listening, and please come back next time.